Welcome everyone. Hello and welcome everyone. Hello again, our guests. Welcome to MBTW Online Talks. It's the series of online sessions where we examine new technologies from 4 different perspectives. M for business, M for medical, B for business, T for technical, and W for wellness. This concept has brought to you by Mental Growth Network. It's a global network of technical professionals dedicated to advanced healthcare through technology. My name is Sergey Kravitz, and I will be today's host. And today we are speaking on the topic of the role of virtual reality in reprogramming fear and craving. We will look at VR, how it affects human emotions, human behavior through neuroscience and immersive technology. As always, we have 4 distinguished specialists, each bringing insights from 4 core fields: medical, business, technical, and wellness. And we will start first from a technical perspective on how VR interacts with human brain. The person who will speak is Dr. José Ferrer Costa. Dr. Costa is a medical researcher and project manager with over 20 years of experience, specializing in integrating XR technologies into clinical settings, focusing on VR projects for chronic pain, cognitive rehabilitation, mental health, the medical training. He brings both physician and XR developers perspective. Offering the medical perspective, we will have Dr. Farah Shiraz. Oh, let me introduce first. Dr. So welcome. Talking about the medical perspective and and also bringing some technology things. It's Dr. Farah Shiraz. She's a chief scientific officer with over 20 years of experience in mental health, clinical practice, academia, and digital health innovation. She leads the integration of evidence-based practices into VR visions for severe mental health conditions, including avatar therapy for schizophrenia. Dr. Farah, welcome on board. Next, talking from a wellness perspective, Dr. Raisa Pokrovska, a social psychologist and product strategist with expertise in health tech applications and serious game design. She's an entrepreneur and CEO of Healing Hand Tech. Dr. Raisa, welcome. And last but not the least, Mr. Pavel Baklikov. He will bring us the financial and business perspective on this new technology. He's a strategic consultant and business expert with over 9 years of project leadership. He has secured deals exceeding $20 million and achieved 40% of annual revenue. So he will help us understand how this technology has a financial potential in healthcare. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'm excited and hope this discussion will be very productive. And thank you everyone who's connected online. Okay, I think we are ready to start, but before Jose starts with his presentation, we will have a short introduction video about the technology. This video is not a promotional one. It's just an example on how VR can be used to help people with their treatment. Okay. Okay, then I think let's start our discussion to not lose any time. Mr. Jose, please, the screen is yours and the speech is yours. Go, go on.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. And I'm very happy to be joining this amazing panel. I'm gonna give you a little bit of kind of insight about how the brain works with fear and craving and how VR can interfere in that or help. So this first slide I can just pass off because Sergey has done a great work introduction me. So it's already there. You know that I'm a medical doctor and XR developer, and I'm focusing on using XR in real life clinical settings. So let's see, how do the brain keep us alive? We have two main ways or or skills that made us develop as a species until the point we are now. Basically, the pain is something we want to avoid, and the pleasure is something we want to seek. And that's what the brain does, no? Avoid pain and seek pleasure. And that's perfect up to the point where it gets distorted because of a trauma or a bad experience. And then what can appear? Some phobias, traumas, addictions, or compulsive behaviors related to the seeking pleasure, mostly. So instead of avoiding pain, we have fear responses. And instead of just seeking pleasure, we have these craving behaviors that are pathological. With traditional therapy, we try to interfere there and reprogram the brain, because the brain, we know it's like a big computer with different programs, all related to the memories or of what happens to us. And in that point is where VR gives us a new way to train the brain, because it's very potent to immerse and make real life situations simulated at the consultation. Let's go a little bit more in detail how fear works in the brain. There are two main areas related to the brain in the brain that is relating to fear. It's the amygdala and hippocampus. Basically, what they do is they treat these bad memories because of a past experience or even a movie. It doesn't even have to be a real life experience, but it creates this memory in the brain that triggers these autonomic responses, which means you have a physical reaction like a racing heart, blood pressure going high, flight, fight, or freeze. And this is how the brain processes fear. For the craving, it's a little bit similar, but it's more related to the dopamine, which is the one of the biggest hormones that is related to pleasure, and it's also in another area of the brain, the nucleus accumbens. And in this case, the memories about the situation or the sensation that something gave you before activate this anticipation, and you reinforce this habit that makes into a compulsive behavior, like seeking any kind of pleasure. It can be sweet or something else that could be more dangerous. But well, we know that the brain is capable of rewiring itself. We know that neuroplasticity is something that it has been proven, and we can make new synapses with the correct process. But how do we do that? With the normal therapy, we could do it with cognitive behavior therapy, we can do it with mindfulness, or we can do it with sessions with the therapist. If we see how can we program the brain in this case. The fear programming is something that was learned by a bad experience and builds up into an avoidance and habit. If you want to reprogram it, you need to change the association of this memory to something bad. And you can do that gradually, but not just with the VR. That's something that I really want to stress here. VR is not the therapy here. VR is the tool used by therapists in this kind of therapies, that is trying to reprogram the association between something and a reaction, like avoidance in this case, no, if it's a fear. So the VR empowers the users to confront and reframe these kind of reactions with a practicing the progressively exposure to this object of fear. And why VR works for that? In in relation to the brain, VR activates the same similar circuits as the real life experiences because it's very immersive. And when someone is living or doing something in VR, they feel like they are doing that in real life, even though they are not facing a spider or they are not going into a plane, but they do feel, and the brain feels like it's real because it's using the same circuits. And because it's using the same circuits and you can make it in a way that you feel safe, it makes a change in the circuit and the association that before was negative to the situation becomes different or healthier. And so we are rewiring fear and craving responses with this repetition of the immersion of the situations. And the device itself, what can it bring, especially apart from the simulation, of course, which is the biggest thing that VR brings to us, and is very powerful in mental health mostly. It enables also gradual exposure. You can start with something very mild or very far away with less noise, different situations that goes step by step until up to the point where you get the full experience. For example, if you're afraid of flying, you won't put the headsets and make the patient go into the plane directly. You start with the patient at home packing the suitcase to go to the trip. Then you have to go to the taxi drive all the way to the airport, the check-in process, the waiting room, the boarding, and then the flight. This is the gradual exposure. And little by little, trying before this exposure, you have also to make a preparation. You have to teach them techniques to avoid the reaction of avoidance, like mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and biofeedback, and it helps the therapies. The other good, powerful uh, tool that comes with VR is the real time regulation of the exposure. You can see that a patient with a biofeedback, with the heartbeat, or even just by asking simple questions, you can see that the patient is doing okay or not. So in craving reprogramming, it goes beyond just the exposure. As I said, it combines the education before the exposure with techniques like mindfulness and behavior change, and then you go in the actual exposure that can be repeated, controlled, and self-regulated, building this emotional distance with the situation. And with the phobia, it's very similar. It makes you feel safe because you know that you're not there, but the brain circuit is still the real one. So it in real time you make this reprogramming of the situation and the reactions. And the clinicians can adapt the session dynamically based on the user responses. Okay, that's so amazing, no? That's very powerful. But as everything, we have to be careful with some dangers. And for me, I brought these three questions that are my main concerns when I think about VR used with patients for fear and craving. And then we're gonna discuss about them. The one is, can virtual cues backfire? Can it be causing a negative reaction to the patient or make it the problem worse? Is there any risk of overstimulating the emotional reaction and making a panic attack, for instance? And how do you ensure a long-term effectiveness? In the first one, I think if you use VR just as it was a game, it's not the proper way to use this tool because this is a therapeutic tool. You have to use it with guidance by a professional that knows how to do it and knows how to prepare you before you use the simulation. That's why you first you start with different techniques like mindfulness or preparation for the exposure, because otherwise you can, instead of teaching these strategies, make the avoidance reaction even worse. So it's very important not to just go on by yourself and try to play with it. Risk of overstimulation, yes, there is also a risk. If you have a strong emotional uh, association with something, a spider, a dog, or anything, if you get in contact with that even in the VR simulation, you can still get to the point that you get a panic attack. And if you're all alone at your place, this is a very bad situation. So it's always good to seek the proper assistance if you're going to use this tool. So you have to start slow, you have to check often the patient, and you have to ensure that it's safe and give the support these people need when they are doing this rewiring of the brain or reprogramming the brain. We wouldn't do it ourselves if it was a computer program if you don't know how to use it. So this is the same. And about the long term, well, you can see sometimes very amazing and impressive change in behavior with phobias. I think Farah is going to talk about some very good examples later on, but sometimes with one session, the patient makes a complete catharsis and change the association of the situation or thing or a voice in the head in the case that I was remembering of Farah. And the relationship with the situation changes drastically. And with sometimes just one session, it's basically cured. But we still have to build on that evidence. So researching on the use of VR in healthcare in any area, but mostly in mental health, is very important to be uh, pursued. It's very important to follow protocols, try to engage with other doctors or therapists using the same tools, because then you can build together more evidence that it really works and follow up the patient with a long-term situation. And with that, we're gonna go to the key messages. So I just want to make sure that you understand that fear and craving are reprogrammable. They are not something that's there forever and there's no cue. They were learned and they can be relearned. So you can reshape this experience. And VR can help because it targets the same circuits in the brain, makes you feel the same situations, but you can change the association of the situation to something more positive. And it's very empowering to the therapist because one of the biggest difficulty to exposure therapy is to make a simulation. You can do it with a little toy that looks like a spider, but if you're really using it with VR, it's much more powerful. So that's my main message. And I think I'm gonna open, maybe we'll go with Farah first, I think, Sergey. How do you want to proceed?
Yes, 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 of course. Thank you so much for the topic, and we will start with Farah. Please tell
Yeah,
your
great.
opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Jose, for a very great, insightful showing the mechanisms of how it works. I think that's always important to understand how VR actually works in the brain. For my work that I do, I work at a company called Hacker VR. I'm a psychologist by background, but I was also an academic. So my work is about building the research to make sure that we are doing evidence-based practice, like Jose mentioned. It's very important when you're working with mental health patients in particular to make sure that you just don't give them a VR headset and just let them free with it. So I'm really happy that you raised that point, Jose, because building the evidence, and it is building, it's been happening for the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years. We've seen a drastic increase in the use of VR in mental health in particular. And for those of you who've worked in mental health, we don't see a lot of innovation in mental health. We don't see a lot of where I always say it's like the dinosaur healthcare, because we need to have more innovation. And I kind of did the jump of going into a startup, a health tech startup, to try and help this positioning of bringing the science into a technology. So the work that we're doing is as Jose said, we do a lot of work in VR and mental health, and more severe mental health. So just like the exposure therapy, we work with patients who actually suffer from auditory hallucinations and have developed some software for those auditory hallucinations to become external. It's a very abstract concept, but the whole premise is that patients are able to externalize that inner voice, and they can go into VR and actually be presented with this inner voice in something called an avatar. So, and it's a therapist-led, So I'm glad, Jose, you pointed out that it's a tool. It should be therapist-led in most cases. And in this case, the therapist actually becomes the avatar. So they can switch between being the avatar and being the therapist. So the way that it works is that the patient and therapist will sit together and they design an avatar of what they believe their voice looks like and what they believe the voice sounds like. And this is what our software does. It's don't ask me about the tech, that's not my part. But then they're able to go into session, into VR, and then be faced with the voice that they hear in an external avatar, kind of real version of the voice. And it brings again the exposure part, because again, this is patients who've heard voices. It's been tested on patients who we call treatment-resistant schizophrenia patients who've had all the treatments out there. They've had medications, but nothing has seemed to work. So this is a new form of therapy for this patient group. And again, it's kind of exposure. So they gradually have it. So the voice starts off maybe in 2D, and then you can bring the voice closer and closer. And again, as Jose pointed out, it's a gradual, slow, step by step, and the therapist is there with them and able to see their physiological responses, because the beauty of VR is that it does create this real but not real experience, and the body reacts as if it is a real experience. I don't know who's done VR, but physiologically you will act as if it's the way. And in psychology, we know that the way you think affects the way you behave. So of course, if you experience something, you're more likely to change your behavior. So when it comes to avatar therapy, the whole concept is that because the patients are able to have this conversation with this voice and learn the techniques at the same time of how they can stand up to this voice, which is often very negative, it's about changing the dynamic and the power and the control of that voice. And eventually, over time, being able to, say, no, if the voice is saying bad things to them, they're able to stand up and say, no, I don't believe you. And that's the beauty of VR. We're able to have these simulated environments in a safe, controlled space where patients feel safe enough to do that. And that's just an example of how we can use VR in severe mental health. Phobias, of course, is also a very debilitating condition for many patients, depending on what it is. But for patients who hear voices, this is something that they experience every day. And from our studies, which hopefully will be published soon, we had this amazing experience with nearly 11 of the patients from the VR avatar therapy group actually stopped hearing voices altogether. And that's not the purpose. We wouldn't say that that's what it's supposed to do. But for some patients, it is making a huge difference. And this, again, brings back this whole neuroplasticity side, where maybe it is something about rewiring the brain and being able to stop that happening. So yeah, I think VR is an amazing tool, and we are expanding the scope of how we can use it across different mental health conditions. But I think the point about the ethical side of making sure that we are using evidence-based practice, we are building up the research, we are making sure that the safety things are in place. Even with our patients who use it for avatar therapy, the session in VR is 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. So it's also not about doing VR for 60 minutes straight, because that, again, is the immersion can be dangerous if it's too long, like you say, and Jose pointed out very nicely. So yeah, I'm all for VR. I knew nothing about VR 3 years ago, and now I'm like a complete advocate of like, yes, we need this to be implemented, and this needs to be part of healthcare. This needs to be just standardized treatment, and we in our team are working very hard to make sure that happens. And I think Jose is on our side as well. But yeah, just sort of my psychological other case study scenario of how you can use VR in different mental health conditions.
Okay, thank you, Farah. It sounds promising and sounds you sound very optimistic about this tool and that this technology to help people to overcome different mental states. Maybe Raisa has a different opinion, maybe, or you completely agree, or what is your perspective from the wellness, how it's creates in general the atmosphere among the people, and maybe a lot of people could be probably resistant towards this VR, and they are not feeling that it could be helpful. How do you explain that, and then what is your thoughts?
First of all, before I start, Jose, great presentation, and Farah, I agree on many things with you. The short answer to your question, Sergey, is it's all about standardization and personalization. For example, in Healing Hand, we are targeting stroke patients. And Jesus Christ, how many times did I hear we have custom hardware? It's kind of as any medical device with custom hardware. It's very complicated. There is a lot of, like a whole bunch of IMU sensors, the fusion and the accuracy and everything. And how many times did I hear the question, why don't you use VR instead? And in this case, for and time and time again, I had to explain, yes, VR is a great tool. Again, it's not a silver bullet like every new buzzword starts with an illusion in healthcare. Like the first, how to say this? There are stages before death, and there are stages of before finally accepting and standardizing the new method or tool or instrument of healthcare. And the first stage is the illusion of a silver bullet. So the denial that it's just another standard in addition to kind of an approved standard, but it still needs to be a standard. So first of all, like AI and VR and gamification and blockchain, thankfully not in healthcare, but at least, but still the illusion of a silver bullet. And in our case, I had to explain time and time again, yes, it is a great tool, but it needs to be applied correctly, like any scientific method, and it needs to be applied with the correct audiences. Stroke patients, right after brain damage with cognitive impairment, they need to exercise. Ideally, we want them to exercise like 2 hours per day. You really want to expose them to so much VR, their brains will start boiling at some point. And that's what I mean by personalization. It's all about, if the person is resisting the method, you can have the very negative, up to the negative placebo effect. Then you need to personalize and provide the education that some patients may not need. Again, onboarding, step by step, kind of integrating and onboarding the patient to this VR is also a process. Then you have the personalization of the processes and scenarios themselves. If same with the avatar. I've seen not with the VR, but I've seen the avatar therapy being used for treatment of the short-term memory loss in dementia. And in this case, the personalization is even more important, because if you don't associate yourself with this environment, it will be, it's another experience, but the more you associate with it, the more kind of emotional and the more of yourself you can project on it, the easier the therapy will go. Again, it depends on the therapy, of course. But when it comes to the standardization, I say this pretty much about everything when I hear people including gamification or AI or VR or any technology that is currently popular. In order for standardization to actually start happening, the first question to ask, prove to me that VR, like this technology that you are doing here, is doing something that others cannot. Prove to me that you actually know what you're doing, that you didn't, how to say this, give me the actual evidence-based proof that you are not just including this for the buzzword. or for the sake of grants or anything else. Depends on who exactly you're talking to. But anyway, same happens to all of the tools. Again, that's just the nature of hype. We are all people after all, even the researchers, despite what the rest of the world thinks sometimes. But it's important to understand, first of all, I wouldn't call it the ethics, because the ethics is something, how to say, I would call it the very, very basics of the standardization for the tool and for the instrument of VR to be accepted into the science as the part of the standard of care. So like it makes the how to say this? It makes all of the considerations that José and Farah already mentioned to a much more basic must-have level, which I think it should be. All of the understanding with what condition it works and with which it does not, what type of patients accept this and which do not, what types of onboarding processes work, and so on and so on. So all of these, again, this all requires massive amounts of research, but it also requires a lot of, skeptical thinking and standardization and refusal of the silver bullet illusion. Again, our product specializes on personalization. I love personalizing the kind of personalization of experience in general. So regardless of the topic you ask me to talk about, I will always talk about personalization of patient experience to be the most crucial one. Surprise, but it all comes down to it comes down to absolutely everything. You need to personalize the heart attack. You need to personalize it at least based on the gender, because the male and female patients have different symptoms of heart attack. You have the same with all of these factors. At the very least, not to kind of, this is the way VR works with this condition. And this is the pattern that we will repeat again and again. That's pattern, that's not standard. Then you get you start researching, you start identifying different categories and different types and how it works. And then you have the actual standard and personalization, because proper standard, at least in my eyes, allows therapists who would use it to be flexible enough with the patient to be completely safe.
Whoa. Okay. I think there are a lot of ideas which can be discussed from Risa, and I think Jose and Farah has some words on replying. But first, I would like to check what Pavel has to say about the financial part or about the business opportunities on this topic, and then we will come back to the discussion. Please keep in mind the questions and the ideas which Raisa brought up too. Okay, thank you. Pavel?
First of all, thank all of you for sharing thoughts. It was outstanding and very inspiring. And I must admit that we are truly blessed to live in such a modern world. The VR used to be a movie plot. It reminds me about the Matrix trilogy. But nowadays, look at where we are now. We can introduce the usage of VR and curing the mental health. So based on my experience, I would say that the health tech companies, startups will be facing some obstacles. The first one is that currently there is not enough proven research and information how VR will be in the nearest future, how it will provide the solution that the people really want. Because if we talk about the mental health, it's always based on the long-term studies. So we need to take this in account. The second one is that the most people are quite conservative when it comes to health tech, and such a modern technology should overcome many biases and superstitions in order to be implemented. The third one is the point from accessibility. The VR is not cheap. It's not for everyone, if we talk about this. So the VR set usually costs about $300 if we speak about the Oculus, with the most common one. So we have to take this in account also. As for the companies, I think it will take pretty much time in order to build a really great company in this field. So the pharmaceutical company are not really interested in the current way how it goes, because it requires a lot of investment, and they rather stick with standard solutions, the pharmaceutical industry.
So, as your conclusion, this area is not willing to get investments, or
eventually, I think that the company will invest in VR startups, but nowadays it's too risky for them.
Okay, any ideas on this matter? So for now, I can see that there is like a small divide between pros and contras, and maybe
As
I
it
would,
should be.
yes, of course,
Yeah,
like
it should be. When it comes to healthcare investment, it's pretty
Of
typical.
course.
I tend to be too chatty, so I will try to control myself. So if anyone has an opinion,
Yeah,
go first.
I just want to connect to talk about a little bit some of the points that Raisa brought are very important. I couldn't agree more. As I said, VR is a tool. It's not a magic box that you use for anything. So we need to research a lot to build this evidence and build the protocols on how to use VR, to what cases, to what type of patient, the onboarding, the gradual exposure, up to the doses of VR. As you said, a post-stroke patient cannot use VR 2 hours every day. It's impossible, or it's not positive for sure. Not at the point we are now, at least. And as any two, of course, we should prove the efficacy of the new treatment comparing to the current gold standard therapy. Anything is like that in healthcare. If you have a new drug, you have to compare to the drugs that we use now to decide whether it's a good option or not, not only for the efficacy, but also for the safety. So with VR, it's the same thing. We cannot just decide that for exposure therapy, we only use VR now. We have to still compare it with the current way to do things like rehabilitation. And the only way to do that is researching, which is something not easy to do with VR, also because of the costs that Pavel brought up.
But I would just like to add, actually, when it comes to the cost, okay, yes, the cost of the headset, maybe $300, but the cost of mental health treatment is expensive. Patients are expensive who have long-term treatment, who are hospitalized. So that cost is much more. And also just, work, going back to work, not being able to provide back to the, economy. We have to think that far ahead. And when you think of it in that context, actually 7 sessions of a VR-based therapy and you have a very effective outcome is pretty cheap. So, I think just giving you a different angle, and I'm coming from a very different perspective in terms of patients who have severe mental health, who have been hospitalized, who have had gone through every treatment, no other options available. And we're seeing a really amazing result in a short-term basis, just 7 to 10 sessions. That is actually super cost effective. It can possibly help reduce hospitalizations. It can help let people build up the confidence to go back to work, to have a good quality of life again. And I think that's what all of us aim for our patients, is that they just have some sort of normal life again. And I think that's what VR can do through this sort of medium. But we see the same challenges that you talked about like the uptake from clinicians. Why should I use this? No, I'm going to stick to my own But from the patient perspective, we see so much interest. Like, it's a novelty, but it's also this sort of, I think there's also this beauty of VR that it feels like you're doing something for them. They have a device, they put it on, you know, it's not just giving someone medication, or even when you do a talking therapy, just a talking therapy as a psychologist. Okay, great, that's fantastic and it works. But having this VR, it just feels like, you know, when you go for a MRI scan, you're going through a machine. I think VR gives that sort of same sort of, okay, we're really doing something right now. So we can't also forget about that impact as well. And from our experience, we see a range of, you know, we think, okay, maybe the older patients won't like this because it's technology. Actually, we don't see any difference between the older patients versus the younger patients who have been in our trials. So uptake, and I think it's about changing the attitudes as well. I think everyone always thinks technology is so expensive, but when you think of it in the long term, actually, it can be. Medication.
It actually saves money a lot, because let's not forget about the mental health. What it actually, first of all, I'm very sorry to be so skeptical, but considering that I've been considering the prices, like retail prices of some medical devices, and considering that some can be like one unit costs $198,000. And that is, you know, a bulk price. 300 is like, considering, but if that's a big if you don't force the patient, every single patient, to buy it for themselves, which creates a completely different situation. Second, when it comes to Farah, don't forget that the treatment of severe mental health conditions, like your target patient audience, also decreases the readmission rates, which brings us to my least favorite topic in the adoption of healthcare. And it's not exactly, clinicians are just about, it's just about teaching them not to be afraid of the new technologies, because some hospitals still use Internet Explorer as the browser. Some still, if anyone still remembers what it is, and some still use paperwork and refuse to even use Internet Explorer, and so on. So it's just about, yes, they are that old-fashioned. And then the rest, the context, the scale of the old-fashionedness depends on urban versus rural, the level of the country, and so on and so on. So there are a lot of factors. I'm just kind of, how to say this, I am sharing stories and generalizing for the sake of the shortness of the story. But when it comes to, so clinicians are about proper training and effective one. So it's not just about, our training costs. So like, you buy our device, but you need to buy our training for extra cost. That's how it usually is with medical devices currently. And then, for example, the hospital real story, if I remember correctly, the head of the department, or the key surgeon, bought the training for himself to use this super cool laser, and decided to save money and didn't buy the training for other surgeons. And yet they bought more than one unit of lasers. Of course, these units ended up in storage in the end. So what's the point? Maybe you should, all of this can be solved with one simple solution. You think about clinicians' experience as much as you think about patients, because it's the clinicians who prescribe and use these technologies. If they don't like you, they will not trust you, they will not prescribe you, and they will not mention you in reimbursement, because this is the real, forget the clinicians, forget the investors, it's the reimbursement providers that are the enemy here. Regardless of what the country you take, they can be government, they can be private. Our startup is aiming for the US companies, so for the US market. So don't even ask me to elaborate on this topic. I can tell you hours of bad stories. But when it comes to the reimbursement, they are the ones who are actually very, very old-fashioned in financially adopting the solutions, because it requires changing the standard of care. First of all, reimbursement only recently learned, insurance companies in general, government or private, only recently learned that patients are living beings with their own opinion, and that if you start thinking about value-based healthcare and like patient-centric approach, which is for some reason an innovative, a sensational innovation in healthcare, even though the rest of the world has known the user-centric approach for decades now. Heavens won't fall if you adopt it from other industries, and you can actually save a lot of money in the end. So, you know, considering just how slow they are in adopting even these basics, even this basic stuff, it's the reimbursement that really makes all of these difficulties here. As a result, it influences all of the rest, because it influences the profit the clinicians make. It influences how investors see how profitable you could possibly be, or how long of a pathway you, like how many years of sales you need to survive through to get this, to get on the reimbursement wave, and so on. So the key is the key to all this evil is the reimbursement.
Maybe Pavel can tell us how to convince the reimbursement authorities to invest to approve this technology, taking in consideration his
That is a good
experience in
question.
business.
My opinion that when it comes to investors, they will ask you two questions, most of all. The ROI of your startup and the scalability. So it's not that easy to scale this product, because it's not a standalone solution for everyone. You have to find an expert who will provide the service. I think that the best way to treat VR and mental healthness is rather combined approach with the traditional ways and slightly introduction of the new modern ways. How can it possibly be? And for most of all, for many investors, it's much easier to understand how to scale up the manufacture of drugs or pills. You just need to buy a new hardware and you get the result, and you can sell it, because by the end of the day, you need to sell your product to the prospects, to the potential customers overall. And this is not that easy nowadays, especially when it comes to such a vivid topic as VR and mental health.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, we are getting short on time, but I would like at the end to each of you to give me like the three main ideas with which you will get out from this session, and like maybe the ideas which our audience will also have to think about for the future. And we start with the Pavel on the opposite way. Like Pavel, Larissa, Farah, and Jose, I would like you to conclude today's meeting.
The three main ideas that I got from this session will be that the VR is a completely new world in health tech. So we should take a closer look at it in order to get some profit in near future. And everyone should be open for new perspective if we are talking about the curing mental health problems and so on and so forth. So I think this is the main ideas that I got from it.
Thank you, Raisa.
I think the main thing that I learned, like at least for myself today, is that VR is very much on the pathway to standardization. That how to very like the big differences on how to use it for different conditions, and even when it comes to just the sector of the mental health. already shows that like the efforts are strong, and we are very much on the way. Which is and unlike other methods, like for example, I can see a little bit of this in gamification, application of gamification of serious gaming in healthcare. It doesn't forget about this evidence-based approach that for different of personalization, that for different types of patients, for different types of conditions, for different types of medical goals that you need to achieve, you need different approaches. And it's not just the universal way of taking a pattern because it looks nice and repeating it blindly once, like time and time again. Which is nice. Unfortunately, we can see such things in healthcare sometimes, more often than we would like to. So it's good that we kind of the healthcare research community is learning not to repeat the mistakes.
Okay, thank you. Farah?
I guess from my perspective, I think we still need more research. It sounds like everyone's still not convinced. So we just need to completely still build up that and convince people like Pavel that this does work, this is cost effective, and how can we implement it? And it sounds like there's still these challenges, and we're seeing it even from our startup trying to, implement and get more studies, and everybody is on board, but there's no budget for it, unfortunately. This is what we always come across. So yeah, so I think it is about still increasing the base. I think it's also about raising awareness of VR. So these sort of sessions are amazing and great to be part of, because I think people don't understand or know that VR can be used in these different ways. And I think this is a really nice, and I think Jose introducing sort of the mechanisms of that is really great to understand how it can work, because people think, okay, yeah, VR works in for gaming, but how does it work in healthcare? So I think today I hope that the audience, and I know us on the panel, definitely learned a lot from the presentation and each other.
Yes, yes. And Jose, your turn.
Yeah, very interesting topic. Very, very strong arguments. But I want to explain that VR has been used in healthcare for decades. If you look for publications in PubMed, which are the strong evidence-based publication, the first one is from 1991. So it's not something that's new. It's just that people don't know about it. And we need to, as you say, Farah, we need to raise the awareness of the potential of VR in healthcare, which doesn't mean it is a tool for everything, a silver bullet. We still need to validate with strong evidence, because we need to see where does it work, for whom, and how much, the doses of VR, everything. And about the ROI, the third conclusion, when you think about companies that want to build the return of inversion of the potential investors, you have to explain that in healthcare it's a bit different, and it's something that's being like the same way we focusing on the person and the patient for deciding all the therapeutic measures in a process. The return of investment sometimes it's not a monetary return, but it's a value return. If you make the life of someone better because we investing on it, it should be worth.
Great conclusion. I think it brings some optimistic note to our discussion, and I'm really happy to hear that. As for me, from my amateur perspective, I'm not a scientist, but I'm a social activist, and I'm excited to know more about tech. As I understood from the general public, and as a general public representative, the VR technology needs more research and more evidence-based results. But together with that, we already have some good examples, and they already showing the results. And when it comes to the treating the mental health and fear and craving, we need to base on the personal approach, like personalized approach for each patient. And actually, one thought came to my mind that Why not to start, as said Pavel, to start slowly by introducing from traditional methods, introducing VR. And if we talk about personal approach, why not including the AI to that component as well, which can calculate faster the personal experience of each personality. Okay, but this is, I think, a totally different topic with AI in mental health. And I
Several
think we can,
topics.
yes,
Several
it's a
topics.
several
AI is a
topics.
whole ocean of topics. Far not all of them. Like they're all funny, but some of them in a very sad way.
Exactly. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for your experience, and thank you for your willing to share it to our audience. And I just wanted at the end to remind you remind to the audience that this session has been brought by Mental Growth Network. Please subscribe to our channels on YouTube, LinkedIn, on all social media where you find us, and this way you will support this kind of the sessions and this kind of important topics. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.